Hey everyone, Dr. Stillman here, back with Jim Laird, and today we are going to be talking about breath, posture, and physical activity, how these things fit together and how they're in the blind spot of a lot of A, doctors, B, personal trainers, C, other health and wellness practitioners, and why we always tackle these with clients or patients, depending on the relationship, sometimes right away. Jim, you want to kick things off with how you approach breath work, posture, and physical activity in your practice?
Here's the thing you have to understand. The worst posture is the one you're currently in. And the thing that you have to understand, it's variability that's the key, okay? So if you get stuck, it's like a strategy. If you get stuck in one strategy, it's kind of like a manual transmission, right? You've got 6 gears or 5 gears or 4 gears, depending on how old you are, or 3. When you lose gears, it's a lot harder on the engine, okay? And sometimes if we're trying to drive performance, we're gonna lose gears on purpose. But then we have to restore those gears eventually to allow the system to restore itself, right? So it's like somebody like Usain Bolt is not going to move like a normal human, right? He's so specialized at running. He uses an extension strategy for his high level performance. If we took that away from him, he wouldn't be able to run as fast as he can.
Explain that extension strategy.
All right. So if you scare a toddler, a little young child, they go like this, right? So basically when you're under high stress, when you're scared or you're in an emergency situation, you arch your back, you throw your head back, and you run as fast as you can. Or you lift something really heavy and you use your spine, and you jam into your joints and your capsules and you lift, it creates a tremendous amount of stability.
And I think you just implied there that powerlifters do the same thing. They're trying to arch back, right?
Yeah, smarter powerlifters do more of a circumferential brace where they're not hard arching. They'll line their rib cage and their belly button up, and they'll create a circumferential expansion where they'll breathe in everywhere and they'll create pressure. But you'll notice, like if they get to like a max, they might arch some, right? But that strategy is a primal survival strategy, okay? Mm-hmm. And it can drive your breathing too. Like if you're having problems breathing, your body will literally crush your spine to help you breathe, right? So in our modern world, because we don't move as much as we used to, aren't exposed to different movements and different things. A lot of times we revert to that, I call it the J-Lo position. And there's a sway back where your pelvis is tipped forward, but you kind of got this pooch belly. Your pelvis is tipped forward and you're kind of slumped forward, right? That's called a sway back. But most people are stuck here where they've got the open scissor where the chest and the pelvis or the ribs are up and the pelvis is tipped forward. And that basically your diaphragm can't do its job. So what happens is you become a neck breather, a trap breather, a lat breather. You're breathing with your big muscles, your prime movers, right? Instead of breathing through your nose, instead of breathing in a relaxed state, and people get tension headaches, their scalenes get all worked up. And of course, all the nerves, from your brain come down through here. So you get these trigger point, I'll have somebody with elbow pain and I'll do a little bit of, pressing in here and it shoots all the way down their arm and all of a sudden their elbow pain goes away. And then, so when you're stuck in this state of extension, right? We call it a state of inhalation, and you're using compression to get your stability. It's very hard to relax. It's very hard to turn off, okay? Exhaling is when our parasympathetic nervous system turns on. And if you're stuck in a state of inhalation, you're in this highly alert state constantly, right? And so it can lead to things like digestive issues. It can lead to cognitive issues, making poor decisions because you're not, thinking with the logical side of your brain. You're going back into your reptilian part of your brain. So really, it's having variability, and there's exercises that I'll show you to help give you some flexion, to help get you moving in different ways. And the problem with a lot of strength training is people are already stuck in this pattern, and then they'll strengthen that pattern even more, right? And so it puts, when you can't stack your pelvis and your rib cage, it makes your hip joints less mobile. It makes your shoulder joints move in funky ways. So it really kind of can be the basis of all sorts of things, from joint issues to, foot not working properly to, everything you could possibly imagine. So it's really the root. It's one of the root foundational things of what's going on is basically what strategy are you using? And do we have, it's kind of like blood pressure, right? Is blood pressure bad? High blood pressure bad? Not if I'm chasing you with a machete, okay? High blood pressure is bad if you're trying to go to sleep, right?
Right.
So it's the same thing with the body. Am I extended in this position if I'm trying to run away from somebody with a machete? Yes. If I'm trying to relax or if I'm trying to move in different ways, being able to turn it on and turn it off is the key, right? And most people get stuck in one strategy. There's some people that I've dealt with that had a hard time revving up. They were so parasympathetic that it was almost a problem. But those are, in our modern world, those are few and far between.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have all these different stimulatory stressors and things like that in our lives. And we've really set life up this way with the modern world, with technology. It's why it's so important to unplug, so important to take time off. One of the things you said, variability, I stress this in so many different aspects of working with people. People forget how varied life used to be. You used to go from doing, for example, something simple, low-grade exercise like carrying something and walking. You're using many different muscle groups. You're using a low-grade exercise, and you're going for a long period of time, and you have no real stress on you during that time. You may be thinking about stressful things, but you don't say, have lots of stressful visual stimuli and so on and so forth. That's just one example, right? You might go from that to, pounding nuts or seeds into a breaking them up so you can eat them. You might go from that to stirring a pot. You go from one low grade, low intensity exercise to another, all with different postures and different positions of the body.
Go into the bathroom in the woods. I mean,
right.
You look at cultures around the world, like the Asian culture, they have these low toilets that are literally on the floor, and you have to sit in a low squat position to go to the bathroom.
Right. And
we've got these high comfortable toilets here that,
right.
Over a period, how many people that are 50, 60 years old have gotten into a deep sit and a deep squat? I try to sit in a deep squat for at least a minute a day.
Yeah.
Most people haven't. And once you stop doing that, you lose the ability to do it, right?
Right. And so, that's one of the things about that posture, right? Mm-hmm. Is that when you assume that posture of squatting, it actually optimizes the anatomy of your anus and rectum for you to actually eliminate. A lot of people's constipation problems and their straining at stool is related to their posture, which they don't realize.
Yeah, I love the
squatty potty.
The squatty potty, yes.
Right.
Well, and also that deep squat when you're in flexion, not loaded, right? When you've got flexion, also resets your rib cage and your pelvis and gets that rib cage and pelvis in a good position too, right?
Yeah.
So, we don't crawl around on the ground anymore like we used to. We're not out doing manual labor. And then when we're presented with this task, our body basically doesn't care about like how it gets the job done as long as you get it done and you survive, right? So, and a lot of the training that people are doing in the gym, it's better now because more people are aware of this, different strategies. But a lot of the high intensity stuff, if you're already in this hyperinflated state, you can't exhale. A lot of the high intensity stuff is just going to drive you even further down that path.
Right.
And then they don't do anything after the session to, round you over a ball and relax and breathe to get you parasympathetic to turn yourself off. You end up going home and you're still revved up. And then you're looking at your phone at 11 o'clock and you're still revved up, and you go to sleep exhausted, but you never really relax.
And so I think what you're saying is that when you work with people in the gym or one-on-one virtually, you're walking them through a diversity of exercises that you're going to tailor to the kind of postures that they're getting stuck in, because they're all different. They're all unique. One office worker's desk is not the same as another office worker's desk. One person's standing desk is not the same as another person's standing desk. One person's keyboard height is not the same height as another person's keyboard. This comes into all sorts of variations with what type of work somebody's doing, how they're doing it, how often they're doing it, and then what they're doing in their off time.
What sports they played when they were a kid,
Yeah.
The brain stores all that move. That's why today is so scary, because these kids aren't getting exposed to all these movements that the brain stores into their library.
And you do work with kids if people are interested.
Yeah, thank you. And what's happening is the older clients that I have, can pick a lot of this stuff up quickly because their brain goes, oh yeah, I was exposed to this like 20 years ago. I kind of know. But a lot of the young kids today, because they haven't been exposed to a lot of these different movements, they don't have it. And I don't know if they'll ever get it. So, we can make them better, but if they didn't get it at, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there was an article I shared the other day with a couple of parents that I'm working with that, the age of like around 8th grade, somewhere between 8 and 12 is when you figure out balance and, all this sort of stuff. And if you don't optimize that at that age, they never really get it, and a lot of these kids at like this age now are focusing on these high level speed and strength training programs. And they're not doing these low level calisthenics, low level skipping games. They're not playing games. They're not, walking on balance beams. They're not doing the stuff that kids would have done in the past, playing on playgrounds. So a lot of them are building the top of their pyramid before they have the bottom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about another one of the really big tie-ins here, which is that how your posture is during the day really has a powerful role in shaping which muscles you habitually breathe with. When I look at this in my practice, and the reason why I think it's so important is that, typically people at a desk are hunched over like this.
Sure.
People who are doing a job with imperfect posture, whether they're standing or sitting, will load and put a lot of weight on their diaphragm and their abdomen. It will reduce the excursion. They naturally end up breathing through their chest and their neck, which is, again, how you activate that sympathetic chain. That's one of the reasons why I want people to stand erect. I want them to really focus, at least for a certain period of the day, on breathing intentionally with their diaphragm. How do you work that into your personal training?
So what I see is because people sit so much, they don't have a good position in their trunk. They don't have the ability to create stability in their middle. They immediately basically revert to the arch, right? And so that's where getting people down on the floor. That's where teaching people like, okay, so you sit in a desk. So every 15 minutes, you set a timer and you get up and cross connect, where basically you stand and you bring one knee up and you touch your elbow to your hand to the opposite knees, like you're cross connecting across your body, which also helps your brain, so you can get stuck in one side of your brain. And when you reach across your body and touch the other side, it kind of helps pull you out and makes both brains kind of work together. So there's a lot of little resets and little things we can do to give people variability. That basically, if you're sitting in your chair, like sit on one butt cheek for a while, then sit on the other butt cheek, get up and hang from a post or move around. You try to get up every 15, 20 minutes and move around. You sometimes use a standing desk, sometimes use a seated desk. You want to do different things. If you're working at home, a lot of times I'll sit at my table in a squat or on my knees and I'll do a lot of my work, right? So the biggest thing is moving in different ways and not always being in the same position, right? And I'm going to go down a deep rabbit hole here, but you'll find that if you're standing, human beings have more guts on their right than their left, okay? This comes from the Postural Restoration Institute. And be careful if you go over there and start looking at it. It's a rabbit hole you get sucked into and never come out. But the main thing you have to understand is that when we're under stress, we go to our right because of the way the organs are set up, the diaphragm, this part of the rib cage. The rib cage is usually, if you lay people on their back, their left rib cage is usually like this, okay? And basically we end up being compressed on this side and this side, basically the right side just is where we get our stability from. If you look at the statue of David, he's stuck in his right side. Okay. It's where our heart is, where our liver is, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to confuse you too much on that. But if you're out and about and you feel yourself standing on your right side, which most of you will notice this now, don't freak out, just shift to the left. So whatever posture you feel yourself in, just do something different for a little while, stand on the left foot for a while, that sort of thing. And that's where, when I get into, we share exercises on here, a lot of things are done alternating because, powerlifting, weightlifting, everything's about pulling the shoulders back, pinning the shoulders back. Even their, mom says, pin your shoulders back. Most people's shoulders are actually pinned back too much. They have a hard time. So most people, if you look at them, their T-spine is flat. I mean, not everybody, but most people have a flat T-spine. Your scapula is concaved, okay? So if you have a flat T-spine and you basically have a concave scapula, what happens is the scapula has nowhere to sit. So what happens is when that scapula, you see that winging scapula in the back, and most people will say, stretch the chest, strengthen the back, strengthen the back. When we get into, some of the exercises that I'm going to give you, we teach a reach. We're basically reaching, we're getting serratus going. We're trying to get some air into our upper back to basically fill out that rib cage so we can change the shape of the structure so that the scapula can actually sit on the rib cage, and then the muscles in the upper back can actually do what they're supposed to do. When that shoulder blade is forward, all the muscles up here have to take over. Okay, so it's weird. You'll have people that are hunched, but they're also extended. It's a really wild deal, right? And you'll know it when you see it, and you know it when you feel it. But your shoulder blades are designed to rotate around your rib cage and then up, right? And if your rib cage, your back of your T-spine's flat, it doesn't mean we have to fix anything. It just means we need to drive some air into some different places. And most people can't get air is going to go to the point of least resistance. So most people, when they breathe in, they're gonna breathe up, okay? Or they're gonna breathe out. They're gonna breathe forward. Most people can't breathe into their low back, and they can't breathe into their upper back. They can't expand their rib cage. Like when you breathe in, your ribs, like you breathe in, you take a breath, your arms, if you're up against the wall with your back pushed into the wall, and you breathe in, your hands should come apart. And when you exhale, they should come back together.
So you're talking about deep breathing with the diaphragm.
Right, but the rib cage breathes in and the rib cage compresses, right? Most people, what happens is because we don't get enough variability in movement, we go up or we go down and up, right? So we'll breathe in, the belly will spill forward, and we'll take a breath, and the shoulders will go up, where it should be out.
Right. So you can test this if you put your hands on your lower ribs.
Yes, yeah, but there's positions we can. What happens is people lose the ability to drive air down. So there's exercises and things we do to put people in those positions so they can actually learn how to get air into their low back, and then teach them how to engage their abdominals. And it's funny because when you actually get people to get their rib cage in a good position, they're like, wow, that feels really good on my back. Well, because if your ribs are here, your pelvis is here, you're jamming your spine together. And if we create variability where we get your rib cage down, your spine tractions, right? So a lot of people are camping on their spine to basically, and it's really simple. It's not anything complicated. It's just a matter of modifying some exercises to get the rib cage, and choosing exercises. Like when you see most people do a push-up, it looks like they're humping the floor because their pelvis is spilled forward, and they're basically doing this push-up with their pelvis in front of their chest, right? And they're basically camping on their back. So like I take guys in the military, put a foam roller between their legs and have them tuck their pelvis. And instead of them being here, like humping the floor, they're having their butt. It almost looks like their butt's a little too high, and it absolutely annihilates them because they haven't actually used their abs in the push-up, and it puts their shoulder blade in a much better position too. And we also making sure that when we're doing things, we reach. So we do a push-up, we actually reach at the top so that shoulder blade actually moves. And it comes together, it comes back, and then it moves, right? Instead of just jamming your shoulder blades together and doing these like this, where the shoulder blade is basically jammed in there. The shoulder blades are made to move. Powerlifting and weightlifting and bodybuilding has taught people to pull their shoulder blades together and hold them there. It creates an incredible amount of stability. Like if you're trying to bench as much as possible, pull your shoulder blades together. It's going to give you a lot more power. But in normal everyday life, your shoulder blades, your whole upper rib cage and your thorax is designed to move, right? Just like that. So we have to incorporate things into our training that help us shift and move our thorax. And it gets a little complicated when you have people that are too mobile. There's a lot of people that that have too much laxity.
Yeah.
Right. So
yoga enthusiasts.
Yes, they can bend their elbows backwards, and it makes me almost want to vomit. And then we've got everything under the sun. But it's actually easier for me to work with someone who's stiff than it is for me to work with somebody who's like, the Fantastic Four dude. He can bend himself around and. And so more range of motion isn't always necessarily better. So it's highly individual, but we can take the principle of, we need the stack. We need the pelvis and the rib cage so the bottom diaphragm can work with the top diaphragm. So that if that's in order, then everything else can work together as a team. What happens is when one group, when you lose the pelvis and the diaphragm, all of a sudden these big muscles have to be breathers, right? And that's the, a big part of the problem why a lot of people are really struggling is because their body works as a team and some of the team members aren't doing what they're supposed to do because they're not in the right position, right? And a lot of people have what they would call muscular weakness, but I wouldn't say it's weakness. It's just the body not being in an ideal position where it can use the leverage of the body. If you like, if your rib cage is here and your shoulder is not in an ideal position, it's going to cause, you can increase somebody's range of motion in their shoulder just by getting their rib cage in a better position.
Right. And so on that note, this plays into in disease with the autonomic nervous system. Because if we want to get somebody's autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic side revved up, we give them everything that you just talked about with the body lifter, power lifter paradigm and this extension, right? And when people live on one side of their autonomic nervous system, they create a lot of imbalances in their body. And when you want to increase someone's parasympathetic nervous system, and this is where I'm going with this, is the hyperventilation, hypoventilation work of a guy named Vladimir Buteyko, a physician who did his research in the former Soviet Union. And so when you activate that sympathetic nervous system with things like extension and with lots of stressful stimuli, like loud noises or very bright lights or danger or threat response or whatever, you trigger hyperventilation. And then when you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, you hunch forward, you stretch. Stretching is a really powerful parasympathetic nervous system stimuli. People don't realize that. It's one of the reasons why people who are spending a lot of time stretching and a lot of time doing yoga, they'll feel good because it also releases endorphins and opiates. But over time, it can create this shift into the parasympathetic, and these people feel really tired and run down. They don't feel like they can respond to stress well. So it all comes together. And the last piece of this that I really want to talk about today is that hyperventilation and hypoventilation all come back to how your posture is set up, what you're doing during the day, and how you're exercising. But you can also then change things about your posture and your autonomic tone by accessing your breath. And so all the different things like we talked about with sympathetic, parasympathetic, just by changing your respiratory rate, you can start to mitigate a lot of the negative effects of these postural changes or habits that you've developed over time. So, Jim, we both talk about Buteyko breathing all the time. Let's talk about how all that, integrates.
Well, and this is something I struggle with because I've spent most of my life in a state of, inhalation where I'm revved up all the time. And if you see me speak at an event or on here, I get very passionate. I get worked up very easily. Intensity is part of my personality, right? And it's part of the way I've adapted to what I've had to deal with, lifting really heavy things for a long time, right? So like when I'm done with this call or I'm done with this video series that we're shooting, because I've talked for so long, I'm in a state of, inhalation, because talking is like, so that's why teachers feel so crappy.
Yeah, and sympathetic activation.
Right. So I'll put my tongue in the roof of my mouth and I'll make sure when I'm driving in my car, I'm breathing through my nose, I'm present. It's very easy to pick up your phone and just start scrolling and then you don't really pay attention to what's going on, but slowing the breathing down and breathe, it's counterintuitive. Breathing as little as you can actually makes you better at breathing. And like yesterday, I went in the pool for 30 minutes and I ran in the pool and I actually put my mouth underwater. So my nose was just in the water. So I was forcing myself to breathe through my nose. And I made sure that I didn't do anything that would make me breathe through my mouth because it was an easy day. So like when you're walking, and it's going to be hard at first. When I first started doing it, walking, I was breathing through my mouth a lot and I slowed it down and I started breathing through my nose and it felt uncomfortable. It almost felt like I wasn't breathing enough. And it felt like I was, I was suffocating, but then my body adapted. And so when I walk and when I do my easy cardio, I make sure I'm breathing through my nose. Okay. Even when I'm training, I'll breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth. In when I'm, I'll breathe in on the way down on a squat, out on the way up. Breathe in for the bottom of the deadlift, out on the way up. Breathe in on the down of the lunge, out on the way up. You know, and if I'm doing some really high intensity stuff, of course, I might have to breathe through my mouth, but you always want to recover. And it's funny, I used to tell kids all the time, stand up tall, you know, don't let the other team see you. You know, well, Michael Jordan is bent over in a crouch position. And that's actually the best way to recover from hard exertion. Is like we had all these coaches, myself included, for the last how many years, I've been telling kids, stand up tall and breathe. Actually getting down like Michael Jordan did is actually the fastest way to recover when you're you know, tired, right? So
yeah, imagine that.
Michael knew. And nobody's going to tell Michael Jordan to like stand up tall. Like, dude, you do whatever the heck you do. I'm not changing you do whatever Michael Jordan does, because, you know, you don't mess with a guy like that, right? If he decides to stand on his head and do stuff, then let him stand on his head and do stuff. But
exactly.
That's kind of counterintuitive. A lot of the things that we've been taught actually go against the way we're wired, right?
Sure. And so one key piece of what you just said is that nasal breathing's got a really important role in this. People who are mouth breathing are chronically hyperventilating and may not even know it. It's been very strongly linked in the medical literature to chronic diseases, chronic illness, metabolic dysfunction, weight gain, poor sleep. I mean, you name it.
Respiratory rate is huge in that too. Like you got a high respiratory rate, you know, that's a big part of this
all the time. We monitor that with the aura rate in people so that they can see where their respiratory rate is and then understand how much stress they were under that day, or how poor sleep affects that during the day.
You know, I look at my respiratory rate every day, and if it's going up, I'm like, I'm in a bad place, you know?
Right.
And then if my HRV is going down, it means I'm not getting enough turn off, you know, and I need to do more stuff to turn that parasympathetic on, you know? So
there's lots of different breathing routines that you can use to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and help people to improve their respiratory mechanics that we tailor these to people individually. Very simple things like, you know, breathing through your nose, slowing down your breathing purposefully, using apps like Headspace, which I know I recommend to a lot of people, and consciously slowing your breathing down while you're doing it. I tell people to flirt with being out of breath. Don't be so out of breath that you're panicking, that you feel sick. Flirt with it. Be just on the verge of breathlessness. It's amazing what that does for people's state of mind. They'll feel so much calmer. They'll feel so much more relaxed. A couple of minutes of that a day has a really powerful effect on your autonomics, shows up in your HRV, shows up in your respiratory rate, all these other metrics that you and I monitor to help people achieve their wellness.
Well, it'll actually clear your sinuses too.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing is people.
I used to have tons of sinus issues. And when your sinus is clogged up, your body's basically telling you need to breathe less. It's trying to make you breathe less. So we fight it with, you know, nasal spray and whatever else. But when my nose starts getting stuffy, I calm down, I slow my breathing down, and it usually clears up right away. You know, it's kind of funny how that works.
Yeah, right. It's pretty amazing. And so people will often say, well, I can't breathe through my nose because it's chronically clogged. Well, if your nose is chronically clogged, if you hold your breath, all those cilia up there will start to work harder and they will clear that mucus because it senses that for some reason, the only way you can get air if your mouth is closed is your nose. Now, that doesn't work for everyone. You got some people with some really deviated septums, some really difficult anatomy up there, sinus polyps, all kind of medical issues can create that. But the vast, overwhelming majority of people can clear their sinuses if they hold their breath gently without creating, you know, a ton of stress. Because that's the thing about reducing your respiratory rate is that when you reduce it slightly, you really improve and you slow down, you'll feel better, you'll feel more relaxed, your heart rate may drop. You start to really hold your breath, eventually your stress response will kick in because your body is sensing there's some kind of emergency that we have to respond to. You know, the natural event would be drowning. You're underwater, your body's got to fight in order to get to the surface or get whatever's keeping you down in the water out of the way. That's the thing, and that's where you can monitor it with your vital signs. You can use a pulse oximeter and you can see where your heart rate is doing. You could look at like your pupillary dilation to see what that's doing, but heart rate's much easier to monitor.
Let's talk about something like cold face dunking for people that are really stuck and they can't get into a parasympathetic state, the mammalian dive reflex and all that stuff. You know, I worked a lot with special needs kids, and I've noticed the kids that have like high sensory problem, like they're constantly in an alert state. when it would snow or it would rain, I would notice the kids would stick their face in the snowbank instinctively. And the teachers, would be like, I don't know why they're doing that. And I'm like, well, actually, they're trying to shut their nervous system off. So it's very interesting that a lot of the times things that kids do they're actually trying to help themselves. It's pretty wild. But I observed that. I worked in special needs kids for a number of years, and the kids with like high sensory issues that were always just wired. Yeah. Anytime there was cold water or anytime there was snow, they'd stick their face in it. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and so let's start that conversation by talking, before we talk about temperature, about the dive reflex. So the mammalian dive reflex is conserved amongst all mammals. We're mammals, so we have it too. And basically, it's this fascinating difference in your response to holding your breath and being underwater, particularly when water hits your face. This kicks in because your body's got to slow down its metabolism when you're in the water and underwater, because you have no access to new oxygen. So paradoxically, if you're exerting yourself, like running, your heart rate will go up, your blood pressure will go up, your respiratory rate will go up. If you dive and you've got water covering your body or just on your face, right? So you can simulate this at home, honestly, with like a bowl for face dunks. When you dive and you hold your breath and you've got water triggering your mammalian dive reflex on your face, your heart rate will actually go down, your blood pressure will go down. It's very hard to measure blood pressure underwater. I don't actually know how we do it. I assume we have. And this really slows your metabolic rate and really calms people down. It's part of why people like me love freediving, because we're in this hyper, alert, very active state all the time in our modern world. Freediving, it's absolute silence. You're holding your breath. You're really slowing down your nervous system. And everything that freedivers do in order to prepare for a dive is to activate their parasympathetic nervous system to reduce their metabolic rate. And they do very special breathing routines that I'll often share with patients who've got serious issues with their breathing mechanics, or who've got serious issues with their autonomic balance, because it will really help them activate their parasympathetic nervous system. So we leverage this mammalian dive reflex a lot when we're working with people to help them relax, calm down, and improve their overall physiology and fitness. Because one of the things about CO2 that people don't realize, and CO2 and oxygen are the two main controllers of your respirations and your cellular metabolism. They don't realize that the sensation of breathlessness is not the lack of oxygen. People who hyperventilate can hold their breath so long that they run out of oxygen and actually have an anoxic or hypoxic seizure, because CO2 is what actually makes you feel out of breath. And CO2 builds up in the system as you exercise, whether you're diving or lifting weights or running or whatever, and that's what triggers you to be out of breath. That's why if you're out of breath because you're running, let's say, and you put a pulse oximeter on your finger, it's going to read 99, 95, 96%. You're going to be fully saturated with oxygen. You'll be wondering, well, why do I feel out of breath? You're not actually out of breath. You're loaded with CO2. The more time you spend in the breathless state, or close to it, as you do when you flirt with breathlessness, as I like to say, or the more you dive, the higher your tolerance for CO2 goes. And that's how you can have a free diver who's got the same physical attributes, same height, same weight, same max bench, same metrics in the gym. But they've trained in free diving, and they'll have a much longer capacity to hold their breath than somebody who doesn't do any kind of breath work and just hits the gym and just pumps iron or whatever.
I get this confused a lot of times, but isn't it when you overbreathe, your CO2 actually gets too low? And
right. So when you breathe, you're breathing in the atmospheric concentrations of oxygen and CO2. Now, because your body's making CO2, there's higher concentrations of CO2 in your lungs. The more you ventilate your lungs, the more you breathe, the lower the CO2 level in your lungs gets. This translates into a lower CO2 level in the bloodstream. So the more you hold your breath, the higher your blood level of CO2. And that's really important for two reasons that people really miss. Number one, CO2 triggers a transformation of the structure of the hemoglobin molecule to cause oxygen to get off of the hemoglobin molecule. You cannot use oxygen that's bound to hemoglobin, and the vast majority of oxygen being delivered around the body is being delivered by hemoglobin. Otherwise, your blood could literally just be water. So it does that. And then the second thing that CO2 does is it's a vasodilator. And this is why if you hyperventilate, you'll notice that you get lightheaded. You're shutting down both blood flow to the brain and you're impairing the delivery of oxygen from the blood that does get to the brain. And this is why the number one thing I look for in people who've got brain fog, fatigue, confusion, and forgetfulness is, are they hyperventilating? Are they mouth breathing? Do they seem out of breath? Do they sigh a lot? I'll go through the Nematogen questionnaire with people, which is one of the only questionnaires validated for screening for what we call hyperventilation syndrome, which is really a syndrome of breathing too much per minute. Well understood and documented in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, has been forgotten by modern doctors. The diseases and the symptoms that are associated with this now get treated with a slew of pharmaceutical drugs, and people forget that you can treat a lot of these illnesses just by changing people's breath work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want to wrap this up now?
Yeah, I think we covered things pretty much.
So let's go over very quickly the practical applications for this.
Right.
One, the more you breathe, the less efficient you are. So you want to actually breathe less. Okay. So you want to breathe through your nose as much as possible with the tongue at the roof of your mouth. You want to move in different ways. And I will add some exercise variations and things that you can do so you can improve your ability to change your shape and your position, right? So we need to move in different ways and we need to move often. We want to try not to stand in a certain position or sit. Even when I'm doing this, I'm standing, but I'm standing on my left foot for a while. I stand on my right foot for a while. I'll push my butt against the wall. I'm trying to move around in different ways. And that's really the biggies, right? And making sure that we don't get ourselves, we have to down regulate. We have to not always be in this constant state of go, which is our modern life, right?
Right.
So we need to find time, and nobody wants to hear this. Like, you do a post on, the 5 things to eat to lose fat and you get 1 million views, right? And if you do the post, like, go into nature and relax, your soul needs nourishment, you get like 4 likes, right? So it's not, people today don't want to be told that they need to relax and chill. They want to be told, like, go harder, even if it's not physical stress.
Yeah.
They people today just have a hard time because of the phones, because we're always going. They don't know what to do with themselves when they don't have a stimulus, right? When there's not a dopamine, triggering thing, they just can't function. So being very deliberate in choosing to slow your breathing down is very important, and also having variety and variation in your body's ability to change position.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that about sums it up. So thanks everyone for listening. In their next talk, we are going to be going over hydration, what's proper hydration, what to add to your water, what not to add to your water, how to avoid overhydration, how to avoid underhydration or dehydration. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.